The Archon Quests of version 5.1 have been absolutely incredible. I honestly thought that the first two acts were some of the best quests we have gotten in terms of lore revelations, but after the Rainbow Destined to Burn, I am confident that the Natlan Archon Quest series is shaping up to be the best in Genshin's history. And what's crazy is that we are not done yet. Even after version 5.1, there is still more with Mavuika and the Traveler in the upcoming versions. But until that time comes, we first need to compile and understand the most important pieces of information that version 5.1 gave us. And that's what this video is for, since I'm about to discuss the 8 biggest lore revelations from Acts 3 and 4 of the Natlan Archon Quest. Of course, just like the video I made for Acts 1 and 2, this one will involve major spoilers for the Rainbow Destined to Burn, which contains several complex details and concepts in Genshin Impact. Therefore, my recommendation is that you first finish the quest, and then come back here, as this will greatly help you understand what I am talking about. So let us get straight into action, starting with number 8. The Seelies have been confirmed as angels. When Il Capitano activates the draconic source mechanism in an attempt to reweave Natlan's ley lines, he unexpectedly awakens the slumbering mistress of the Night Kingdom, also known as the Lord of the Night, Teyvat. The Lord of the Wyob then hits 2 birds with 1 stone by confirming that she is a Seelie, and then elaborates that Seelies are in fact the angels of Teyvat. She then proceeds to blast lore all over my screen, some of which I will talk about in a few minutes. Overall, I give Teyvat a score of 3 Mavuikas per minute. Let's see how many of you will get this reference. Anyway, in my previous video about the Abyss, Primordial One, and the Night Kingdom, I discussed how the Wyob of Natlan are likely Seelies, since they reside in and rule over what is effectively a ley line realm of concepts. And I am really glad that just a few hours later, we got a confirmation that this was indeed the case, in addition to an explicit proof that Seelies are angels right from the mouth of an angel. One of the oldest lore theories that I have had running on this channel was that the pure-blooded Khaenri'ahns are descendants of Seelies, either biologically or symbolically, but more so biologically in my opinion. And back in the day, I had to go through so much bullshit and mental gymnastics with Nouvellette, Egeria, and Jacob Baker to justify my claim. But thanks to version 5.1, this is literally all I have to say from now on. Native Khaenri'ahns can become Abysslings such as Heralds, Lectors, and Baptists. The Wyob, who are Seelies, who are angels, can create Wyob manifestations that are inspired by biblical angels. Abysslings look like corrupted angelic manifestations. Therefore, native Khaenri'ahns are probably descendants of Seelies. Additionally, Seelies have a great affinity to the moon, and the Khaenri'ahn Crimson Moon dynasty took the ecliptic moon as their symbol, where one of their descendants, Peruer, very clearly brandishes angelic motifs. I already made a complete design analysis for her if you want more information on that. Aside from Peruer and other native Khaenri'ahns, there are a few characters in the game who are likely closely related to angels or might be angels themselves. The first such character which comes to mind is the third of the Fatui's Harbingers, Colombina. Straight off the bat, the best indicator we have for Colombina's identity are the angelic wing ornaments at the back of her head. On top of these, she displays a few other characteristics consistent with angels, such as a veil to cover her eyes, a beautiful singing voice, which Seelies aka angels are known for on Teyvat, and her title is the Damselette, which means a young unmarried lady, a sign of purity and piety in other words. There is also the high likelihood of her constellation being the dove, and doves in Christianity are common symbols of angels and especially of the Holy Spirit, which in turn is a person of the Holy Trinity, the God. And of course, I don't need to tell you how that applies to Genshin with the Triquetra and the Moon Sisters and the Seelies and whatnot. Oh, and by the way, Colombina's angel wings make her look like Sunday and his sister Robin from Honkai Star Rail, which I find interesting for a bunch of reasons, but that's a very long-ass tangent that we do not have time to get into right now. It's also worth noting that Citlali, while probably not a Seelie/angel, could still be meaningfully related to them. For starters, she is from the Masters of the Nightwind, immediately bringing her closer to angels, since that's the tribe most proficient at communicating with them, and Citlali is by far the best at said communication. Who knows, this might have to do with why she looks so young despite her age. She also knows how to detect and eliminate lingering souls on someone's body, an ability only displayed so far by Il Capitano and was probably taught to him by Ronova, more on that later in the video. Yeah, there is definitely more to Citlali than meets the eye. However, perhaps the biggest benefactor of the Seelies' confirmation as being angels is Anya's story, The Feline Firm, which tells of how a group of stray cats plotted to abduct the beautiful Snow White cat from the esteemed master's mansion. I know that I've been promising to cover this story for a while, and I'm glad that I ended up waiting. Trust me, this book is absolutely mind-blowing once you realize the meaning behind it. We're definitely gonna talk about it in the not-so-distant future. Now, some of you watching might be wondering why I have this at the bottom of the list. Shouldn't Seelie lore be a really big deal? Especially when the lore reveal confirms a suspicion that we have all had for years, and yes, it is indeed a big deal. So this being at number 8 should tell you how insane the upcoming 7 are. Wait till you see what's at number 2 and 1. Before we get there though, we must first go through number 7, and at 7 we have the source mechanism and the ley lines. Mavuika explains how the battle between the Descender, I assume she means first Descender, and the ancient dragons destroyed the corner of the world, allowing the Abyss to invade Teyvat, and Natlan was affected the most due to its ley lines being weakened severely. In the eras that followed, Yualtekuten used the fragments of the old ley lines to construct the Night Kingdom under the guidance of Ronova, making the two of similar composition. In my last video, the same one where I talk about the YO being Seelies, I discussed how Il Capitano likely wanted the Pyronosis from Mavuika for the sake of reconstructing Natlan's ley lines, since, you know, Boer told us that the Gnosis can control ley lines back in Sumeru. Lo and behold, that's what Capitano was trying to do, and when he failed to obtain the Gnosis, he turned his attention towards the source mechanism, an ancient device from the pre-Natlanese Dragon Empire of Siwakotl. What's impressive about this source mechanism is that it can more or less fulfill the function of a Gnosis in terms of reweaving the ley lines, which is really cool when you consider that it was created by ancient dragons, proving that they controlled and understood the elemental networks at such an intricate level to the point where they created devices which could reshape and reconstruct the ley lines. To be honest, the more I have come to learn about the ancient dragons, the more I am impressed by them. They were not just gods of nature, they were also advanced and sophisticated enough to the point where they could manipulate the literal fabric of their world. Even if Siwakotl's civilization lacked the prerequisite knowledge to properly navigate what was back then Teyvat's new ley line system. By the way, when the heroes were talking to Yualtekuten, I was super annoyed, because in the back of my mind I knew that I had seen the source mechanism somewhere before. And the whole time I was thinking to myself, where have I seen it before? Where have I seen it? Until 2 days later, while I was watching Blue Box, that I finally remembered, oh wait, it's in the mausoleum of the goat, Amun. Now, what the fuck does Blue Box have to do with Amun? Yeah, I don't know, but that's what happened. Regardless, if you look at the central component of Amun's mausoleum, you will easily notice its resemblance to the draconic source mechanism, even including the inscriptions running down the middle. Furthermore, Capitano wanted to use the source mechanism to dismantle the Night Kingdom and reconstruct it into a proper ley line network. I am saying this because the Night Kingdom currently serves as Natlan's realm of the dead, housing the souls of those who die. A property that it kinda shares with the ley lines, as we have seen in the story quest Transient Dreams. This component we are interested in is found in the Hall of Truth, and it utilizes Primal Light, which is essentially unaligned elemental energy. And Primal Light is of the same color as the ghosts of Tsurumi Island whom the boatman takes to his lady, Ronova. To reach the Hall of Truth, you must first pass through the Hall of Duat, where if you look downward, you will observe a ghostly sea of primal light exuding out of it. That's quite relevant, since Duat is the ancient Egyptian realm of the dead, like the Night Kingdom. Therefore, in addition to its other functions, this construct is likely some kind of source mechanism which Amun implemented in his mausoleum. And it makes sense for him to have known about these things considering his relationship with Nabu Malikata, whom I suspect to have been a high-ranking angel back in the days, probably akin to Yualtekuten. So it isn't out of reach to assume that she taught him, or at least shared with him, this kind of technology regarding the ley lines. You know what? Since I brought up Yualtekuten, how about we keep her with us for a bit, shall we? She's definitely going to be helpful for what I have at number 6, which is the nature of Phlogiston and elemental energy. After resolving their differences with Il Capitano, the Traveler and Paimon stay behind to ask Ualtekuten a few questions. During that conversation, Ualtekuten explains how, after conquering the Light Realm from the Ancient Dragons, the Heavenly Principles used the Phlogiston found in the Light Realm's elemental currents as a basis for elemental energy to better counter the Abyss. Here, Ualtekuten confirms a theory that I have talked about many times in the past, which is the idea that the elements exist on a spectrum similar to the electromagnetic spectrum of light. Keep in mind that what Ualtekuten tells the Traveler has already been in the game since release with the colors of the rainbow name card, which reads, "Light can refract into countless colors, but people stop at 7 because they're too lazy to count. Perhaps the elements are like that too." However, it's still nice to have this concept expanded upon and explained properly. We all know that the elements play a central role in the story of Genshin, so this knowledge will definitely be useful whenever we talk about the Primal Light or the Omni Element in the future. I'm also glad that Ualtekuten confirmed Phlogiston as being the precursor of modern elemental energy. I was suspecting something along these lines because if you look at the Primal Fire, which is the embodiment of Phlogiston energy, it's a flame that generates light. So while 6 of its 7 wavelengths disperse in the form of Natlan's 6 tribes, the 7th wavelength, or rather Pyro, remains as part of the Primal Fire itself, which represents Natlan's Archon. It just makes a lot of sense. I like that the developers made Ualtekuten explain it this way. I also want you to take a look at how both Phlogiston and elements move. They both share a fluid type of flow. This behavior is largely attributed to both operating within networks, known as elemental currents in the case of the Light Realm, and ley lines in the physical realm. Although I think the Light Realm's elemental currents are going to get retconned to Phlogiston currents soon, given all the recent developments. Now, Ualtekuten tells the Traveler that the Heavenly Principles created elemental energy with Phlogiston as a blueprint, but she doesn't say whether they created Irminsul. Regardless, elemental energy flows within ley lines, the heart of which is the ley line tree Irminsul. Therefore, the Light Realm's Phlogiston network likely has or had a tree. And if the Light Realm had a world tree, well, then what stops the Void Realm from having one too? In the Void Realm, energy flows in the form of dark currents, which I will admit we haven't fully seen yet, but we do get glimpses of it every now and then. So I do think these dark currents are guided by a central abyssal tree in the Void Realm. Who knows, it could be called Qliphoth from Kabbalah or something. And I am saying central here because I also think that the Void Realm has multiple minor abyss trees, but that's a whole other topic for another video. Okay, let's give Ualtekuten a quick break and move on to the next lore revelation at number 5. We now know that Il Capitano was in fact a Conrian soldier from the era of the Cataclysm. Despite what some might say, this reveal did not come out of nowhere. There was build-up to it throughout Natlan, especially during the world quest Peace to the Slumbering with the Children of the Echoes. Following Conria's cataclysm 500 years ago, many of the kingdom's soldiers fled after realizing the futility of defending Conria. Instead, they resorted to retreating away into Teyvat, where they assisted the Seven Nations with suppressing the spread of the Abyss. The Order of the Swan Knights were one such group of warriors whose remains can be found throughout Sumeru. Il Capitano's regiment likely found themselves in a similar position to the Swan Knights, so they joined forces with the tribes of Natlan, and just like the Swan Knights, the deeds of Capitano's men were also lost and forgotten until recently, when the Traveler and Titu confirmed the truth behind their heroic sacrifices. I should also add that Il Capitano most likely held a much more prestigious position in Conria than what the English localization conveys. While Ororan and Capitano were trying to activate the source mechanism, the soul of an elite Conrian warrior named Gutherd took over the former's body in an attempt to ensure the success of Capitano's plan. After Capitano prevents him from potentially killing Shilonan, Gutherd refers to him as Commander. I didn't pay this much attention until Capitano told the Traveler how Dainsleif's name was all he knew back during his days in Conria. The thing is, Dainsleif was the captain of the Royal Guard, and here is Capitano, a quote-unquote commander, praising him so highly. This made me curious enough to look more into this and see where the two would have stood relative to one another, and I think what I found is a bit interesting. If you check the Chinese version of the game, of course, Il Capitano's vague title of commander is actually supposed to be general, which makes a lot more sense, since Dainsleif, as the captain of the Royal Guard, would have led a special group of elite soldiers tasked with protecting the king and his family, while Capitano would have been a general in the kingdom's army, possibly even the general of Conria's entire military, considering the fact that he can match an Archon in combat. It's also worth mentioning that Capitano first goes to defend the sulfurous veins next to where his men died at the Children of the Echoes during the war with the Abyss in the Rainbow Destined to Burn. I almost wonder if he went there to bid them farewell before going to war. Another thing I should quickly cover, and I do not want to waste too much time on this because it isn't that important, is that the cryo aura around Capitano was never meant to be a Night Soul, and I am not really sure why so many people jumped to that conclusion. Even back in version 5.0, if you take a look at Moalani, Kinich, and Kachina's Night Souls, you will notice that they have a distinct, vibrant appearance that is aligned with the power of the Primal Fire. Meanwhile, Capitano's aura seems to be a coating of cryo energy which he covers his body in order to levitate and fly. That being said, his cryo aura does have a hint of darkness to it, so although it might not be a Night Soul, it might still be a similar sort of power gifted to him by the god of death, Ronova. Yualtakuten, your break is over. Get back over here, because number 4 is Ronova's deal with the captain. While discussing the aftermath of the war with Mavuika, the Traveler and Paimon point out that Il Capitano's desire to assist Natlan against the Abyss likely goes beyond his simple loyalty to the land, indicating that he has other motivations. We get a glimpse of what those motivations are at the very end of Act 4 when Capitano visits Yualtakuten to ask for her assistance against his final enemy. Based on what he tells her, it is pretty clear that Capitano borrowed power from Ronova, since he knows the price that Mavuika must pay for using the God of Death's power. Yualtakuten even surmises as much, stating that Ronova must have been the one who sent him on his long journey, which I found quite peculiar when I first heard it, since it reminds me a lot of what happens in The Pale Princess and the Six Pygmies, particularly when you consider Il Capitano saying his flesh is rotting and the pygmy who goes into exile is the deformed pygmy. And that got me thinking. When Il Capitano talks about rot, it might not be the conventional rotting we understand involving protein breakdown and putrefaction. You see, the deformed pygmy should be Dainsleif, and if you look at his right arm, and the right side of his face for that matter, you will notice that it is corrupted with this quasi-abyssal, perhaps even celestial type of energy. Look, long story short, it reminds me a lot of Arlecchino's arm, but instead of bloodfire, we have this blue color which could indicate primal light or ley line energy. Thus, I wonder if Il Capitano's rotting is similar to Dainsleif, where he is becoming this weird, cursed, almost tree-like creature. That would definitely be cool. I really want to see that in the future. Regardless, Capitano and Mavuika are not the only two who borrowed power from Ronova. As a matter of fact, it seems like Ronova has been dishing out more contracts than my man Big Dong Jong all the way over in Genshin's Chinatown. But Mavuika wasn't the first to borrow power from Ronova. She borrowed power from the guy who borrowed power from Ronova. So let's talk about this original borrower. Anyway, Xbalanque. Number 3 is Renova's deal with Xbalanque. If you missed my analysis of Acts 1 and 2 of Natlan, I went over how Ronova is the creator of the Thunderbird Khana Kapatsir, which is important since just like on Surumi Island, feathers are a crucial symbol in Natlan. You know, the plume of death and whatnot. Back then, I said that it would be really nice if we got to see Xbalanque's conversation with the boatman's lady, and we kinda did. So now I can confirm that it was in fact really nice. Of course, we didn't get to see them, which is a blunder on Hoyo's part, but at least we heard most of what they had to say. In addition to obtaining the authority of fire, Xbalanque took Ronova's power, granting him unparalleled strength. He then divided this strength and passed it down to future generations of Natlanese archons and heroes. Upon their death, the legacies of these heroes were inscribed as ancient names on obsidian feathers. The angels of the Night Kingdom ensured that these names would continue to pass on, thereby accumulating greater legacy, and with legacy greater might, as they did until the ancient names reached the heroes who unleashed that great power Mavuika used against the Abyss. On that note, it's time we discuss what we have seen from the Abyss. At number 2, the Mark of Gosoythoth, Yog-Sothoth. During the first 3 acts of Natlan, we learn about abyssal pylons, which are constructs that the abyss can spawn as portals for its monsters to enter Teyvat. Luckily, these pylons can be destroyed given a sufficient quantity of elemental energy, since the elements are directly opposed to abyssal energy. However, when the Abyss decided to launch its full-scale invasion of Natlan, the Abyss Heart that manifests in the sky rains down pieces of its body onto the land. These Abyss Tumors significantly reinforce the invading army by continuously spawning abyssal pylons, and unlike the pylons, the Abyss Tumors are seemingly impervious, or at least far more resistant to standard elemental energy. Only by igniting the power of death in combination with the primal fire could the warriors of Natlan fight back and destroy the Abyss Tumors. Once we gain the ability to harm them, it is revealed that these tumors are called the Marks of Gosoythoth, from which we can infer that the Abyss Heart's name is Gosoythoth, where Gosoythoth is an obvious anagram for the Lovecraftian eldritch deity, Yog-Sothoth. And look, had it been any other eldritch Lovecraftian name, I would be willing to let it go here, but the thing is, Yog-Sothoth is, well, she's already a character in the Hoyoverse. You see, back in the days when Hoyoverse were known as MiHoYo, they developed a game called Gun Girl Z, and while you might be fooled into thinking that it is all about guns, girls, and zombies, it actually contains the most batshit unbelievably overpowered characters in the Hoyoverse, one of whom is this little girl right here, Yog-Sothoth, the primal god of the White Abyss. Gosoythoth might be a hint that Yog-Sothoth is the outer god whom Teyvat is struggling against, but if it's her, then I'm gonna tell you right now, there is a 99.9% chance that she is going to get ultra nerfed in Genshin. There is no way the developers are keeping her the way she is in Gun Girl Z. This character is so ridiculously no, ridiculous isn't even the right word. Comedic, that's the one. She is comedically overpowered. And by comedically, I don't mean funny, I mean comedic in the sense of being objectively dogshit writing. This is not good writing, it's laughable how bad this character is. As you can tell, I do not like these types of overpowered characters. Good ones are few and far between. Most of the time, they just ruin a story with mindless power scaling. And I think the developers of Genshin are aware of this, so if she exists, we are likely going to get an updated, more modernized version of her. On top of that, she also controls the White Abyss, which, oh my god, I'm gonna have to explain the White Abyss now, won't I? You know what, I want to move on to number 1, so here's what I'm gonna do. Let's first wait and see if she really is in Genshin, and if she is, then I'll make a dedicated video about her, where we go into all the stuff around her, along with her Lovecraftian and Gnostic history, etc. Alright, number 1. The biggest reveal and confirmation of 5.1, Rubedo and the False Sky. When Haburim uses the power of the Primal Fire and Ronova to destroy Gosoythoth, her attack's residue impacts and momentarily breaks a small portion of Teyvat's firmament. This reveals a crimson-red sky with the shattered remains of a moon. If you zoom in on this moon and look carefully, you will notice that it resembles the moon we see on the login screen of Honkai Star Rail right behind the Astral Express. Also, it is oddly similar, maybe even identical, to one of the 6 icons found above Marjorie's shop in Mondstadt, specifically the bottom one. Look at this. Now, before we saw the broken moon, this symbol was probably a reference to the holographic projection of the treasure planet from Disney's animated movie, Treasure Planet. To be fair though, I've seen this exact same type of sphere countless times. I'm sure you guys can name several more examples. What I am interested in is the sky around the shattered moon along with the energy which repairs the firmament. This crimson energy engulfing the world is the power of the final stage of the alchemical magnum opus, Rubedo, Red. The production of the Philosopher's Stone, the power to transmute base metals into gold, manipulate fate, and grant immortality. And now we know for a fact that this is the power of Celestia. I've already made several videos discussing the nature of Rubedo. Most of the time, I would point out how the Sustainer's golden power is coated crimson during the opening cutscene, indicating that she is also using the power of the Philosopher's Stone. Furthermore, the Narcissus Ordo of Jacob Baker criticizes the alchemists of Kandria for foolishly swapping the final stage of their magnum opus from Rubedo, Red, to Citrinitas, Gold. Keep in mind that Jacob studied the work of Freindotter in order to better understand understand Elenas's blood and help Rene on his quest to become a world-rivaling will. Which back then must have meant that Chemia was useful in this process, but now we know that it is, since this is literally the power which the Heavenly Principles use to sustain and control Teyvat. Aside from Rhindotter's work with Elenas and Durin, a very straightforward example of where we see this type of power is during Alhaitham's story quest, The Illusions of the Mob. Like I said many times in the past, the alchemical magnum opus involves the union of the Solar King, represented by gold or red, and the Lunar Queen, represented by white. The exact details of this process vary depending on the source, but the general idea is that we get the Crimson Philosopher's Stone. During the Illusions of the Mob, the academia scholar Siraj creates a hive mind of people where he is the mastermind, or the king if we are to use alchemical terms. And when Alhaitham breaks the people free, Siraj's illusionary world crumbles, plunging the king into a sea of red. Of course, it is extremely unlikely that this is the same red that the Sustainer and the king use to maintain and repair the false sky. However, it could still be a simplified allegorical representation of the larger scale process going on in Teyvat. The elephant in the room here, and the biggest culprit I can think of behind all of this, is the Crimson Moon. But just to be clear, when I talk about the Crimson Moon in this context, I am referring to those who follow it or act on its behalf. After all, it is said that during the Cataclysm, Conria's eclipse, their black sun, was swallowed by the Crimson Moon, where the Chinese phrasing portrays this event as an act of vengeance. It is unclear how or what or why the Crimson Moon did this to the Black Sun, yet whatever it was that was done, it remained etched in Beelzebul's mind for hundreds of years, with the Baal Moon's visage appearing as the most prominent landmark in her domain. Thus, don't be surprised if the red sky engulfing the firmament is a product of the Crimson Moon's influence. Let me ask you this: what if the Crimson Moon itself is the magnum opus? One giant Philosopher's Stone. This realization suddenly makes books such as Perrin-Harry and Princess Mina of the Fallen Nation even more interesting than they already are. In Perrin-Harry, it is said that gods came from beyond the Sea of Stars, and the Crimson Moon dynasty yearned to acquire such transcendent beings who could match or even surpass the very gods. Ether and Lumine are such beings, and the Melusine Canotilla calls the Traveler a terrible monster who can devour the world with a single bite. This is without mentioning that one Conrian Serpent Knight who says that the Traveler is a calamity, and he is the companion of the tyrant known as Fate. The way in which Edgetho describes the Traveler and Paimon immediately makes me think of how Peruer's ancestors from the Crimson Moon dynasty lament the fact that Fate surrendered herself to the tyrannical usurper.
Perhaps there's an inept god out there deciding everyone's fates, much like the academia student drafting Darbill's scripts. Yeah, inept is a good word for it. Honestly, it might even be a little too civil to describe a god who turns fathers against their sons and is bent on endless warmongering, don't you think? Anyway, that's exactly why actors need to wake up and realize they don't have to follow the script.
Canotilla also calls Paimon a rainbow balloon whose string reaches beyond the sky itself. Here, I would like to remind you of what we learned about the nature of elemental energy from earlier in the video, in addition to the fact that Paimon uses the Omni element in Genius Invocation. So, I am pretty sure Paimon's string originates from either the Crimson Sky or one of the moons beyond the firmament. Possibly even the shattered moon we see at the end of the Rainbow Destined to Burn. I am not joking. Princess Mina of the Fallen Nation has become a lot more suspicious now. I cannot stress enough how this is a revelation of titanic proportions and implications. After all, the production of Rubedo consumes human souls as a fuel for the Philosopher's Stone. Shall I remind you of what we saw with Yelan and Shao during the Chasm Archon Quest? Now that I think about it, Morax did use gold to rip Shao from the subspace. See? Let me cook, guys. Let me cook. We will come back to this in the future. Until the future comes though, we have reached the end of this video. The Rainbow Destined to Burn was a very cool Archon quest, so I hope that Hoyo have a satisfying conclusion for Natlan in the upcoming versions, since the Traveler and Mavuika will be going to fight the Abyss. That should be interesting. As always, a huge thanks to everyone who supported this channel on Patreon, and thank you for watching till the end. For now, I've been My Name for now, and I will catch you in the next one. Take care.